The following podcast is an exclusive presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Thank you for coming to the Project Entertainment Network store. Please place your order. A good choice. A t-shirt for the horror show with Brian Keene. Amanda Method coffee mug. There's more. A Necrocastic on hoodie. That's sharp. But why on earth would you want Bizong leggings? Wait, are you Mr. Frank? The Project Entertainment Network store, stacked with goodies from all your favorite podcasts. T-shirts, hoodies, mugs and more. www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
There shall come a podcast like no other. Defenders Dialogue with Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Marvel Comics' original superhero non-team convenes once again. The Incredible Hulk, the Savage Submariner, the Master of the Mystic Arts, Doctor Strange, and a dynamic supporting cast of Marvel superheroes battle against evil as the Defenders. Without further ado, true believers, here's your hosts, Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Excelsior!
And welcome back once again, true believers, to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene.
And I'm Christopher Golden, Brian. And you know what? Man, Excelsior, true believers, I am so happy, Brian. You know why I'm so happy?
Because we have an advertiser this week?
That's right.
That's right. This week's show is once again brought to you by author David Bryan. His new supernatural cosmic mystery novel, The Strange Case at Misty Ridge. It's available right now in paperback and ebook. In fact, if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, The Strange Case at Misty Ridge is free. Doesn't get any cheaper than free, does it, Chris?
Well, not unless they pay you to read it.
Exactly. If you're into occult detectives such as John Constantine or our very own Damon Hellstrom, the son of Satan, then you will love The Strange Case at Misty Ridge, partially inspired by the works of William Hope Hodgson. And again, the author is David Bryan, and we thank him for sponsoring Defenders Dialogue.
We do indeed. The other thing that I'm grateful for, by the way, is it is officially, or almost officially, fall. I mean, it's soon. It is hot as blazes right here. We're in the middle of a heat wave at the end of August. But I am so happy for fall. I'm so looking forward to it. And you will see me get to be in a much better mood.
Well, you know what happens in the fall? Right around Halloween time in your area?
The Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival?
That's right. When is that again this year?
That is Saturday, October 13th from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. at the Haverhill Public Library. And you're going to be there. I
will be there. You would think I would remember the date since I am going to be there. But yeah, I'll be there. I'll have some Defenders Dialogue swag if any of our listeners want to stop by.
Well, I got to tell you something also, and this is we're riffing here, folks. It sounds like we wrote this out, but we're actually riffing. Brian, my heart was broken last week.
Why?
Because for a moment, it appeared that Marvel was going to relaunch the Defenders.
That's right. Now I missed this because I was signing books at KillerCon in Texas, and you texted me.
I know.
Very excited and said that it looked like there was going to be a relaunch. What happened there?
And I was hoping it was going to be written by our friend Colin Bunn, but basically what happened was that 4 days ago, Marvel started posting teasers. One with the Hulk, one with Namor, one with the Silver Surfer, and one with Doctor Strange, all drawn by Ron Garney, who is a fantastic artist, old friend, with the line, "The best defense." But sadly, it turned out that rather than being promos for a new relaunch of the classic Defenders lineup, and I was hoping we would see Valkyrie and Hellcat and Nighthawk added to that list, what it is it's 5 one-shots written and drawn by different teams featuring, and it's going to be called The Defenders, The Best Defense. So it is a Defenders project, but it seems to me these kinds of things rarely work well.
They never.
You know what I mean? Like, instead of just choosing to relaunch the Defenders, they're doing some kind of event. Invariably, the 5 issues, which will be those 4 characters and then one that has them all in it, invariably those issues will all be of very varying quality.
Right.
And it won't really get people that excited about a new series. Maybe it will. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll be terrific.
I don't have high hopes for it. There's a reason the House of Ideas is now the House of Recycled Ideas, you know. But I'm a bit more critical than you are of modern day Marvel. So
you are. Well, I guess I'm an optimist, and I
guess that makes me a pessimist.
I think it depends on the day. I mean, there are certainly days when I'm definitely not an optimist. But anyway, so I was excited.
You know what I am optimistic about?
What's that?
Defenders 102 through 104, because that we know is good. It was good when we first read it as teenagers. And I can't speak for you, but rereading these 3 issues over the last week, they were good all over again.
They were, although I think we're going to fight about 104, but we'll get there. I also have there's some interesting letters in 104, but we start with Defenders 102. And again, we're still with the fantastic team of J.M. DeMatteis on the script, and Don Perlin and Joe Sinnott on inks. We also had Jack Abel and I can't think of his first name, Trapani, working on this particular issue.
And I'm excited.
And there we go, Brian. We open with a great splash page.
We do, and I'm excited by that splash page. Do you know why?
No, tell me why.
Because for once, I am not reading a collected edition. I am reading the actual original floppy back issue, so I can see the ads and everything.
Oh, how did that happen?
When I was in the burn ward, a very good friend of mine just sent me a random stack of Bronze Age Marvel and DC and Charlton and Gold Key comics, and they delighted me so much that I have secretly been going to the comic book store every week, and I allow myself $20 and I buy some back issues, and I found a stack of Defenders at $1 each, so I snatched them up.
Excellent. We like that.
Yeah.
Well, so this is a beautiful splash, folks. It's Gargoyle and Clea, working their magic together, which I think is fascinating. I mean, on Kyle Richmond, a.k.a. Nighthawk.
That's right. We come to find out that Kyle's new nurse, Luann Bloom, who we met in a previous episode, she brought Kyle to see Doctor Strange. Unfortunately, Doctor Strange is out of town because he's over in the pages of the Micronauts helping them.
Which I'm still... It's really interesting to me that the Microverse and Doctor Strange have actually encountered one another in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I was totally unaware of the fact that Doctor Strange... I'd never read Micronauts. We've talked about this.
I know. We've talked about that before. That boggles my mind.
It's just not my thing. But so I was unaware that Doctor Strange did a stint in the Micronauts, in the pages of Micronauts. Yep. But in any case, the Gargoyle and Clea have decided to help out Kyle. They're trying to help him with his paralysis issue because it is mystically related. Right.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and they're unable to assist him. He's still paralyzed during the daylight hours. But we get. I mean, DeMatteis has to do the obligatory recap for new readers,
right?
Because especially under Jim Shooter, the edict was every comic book is somebody's first comic book,
right?
But DeMatteis uses the opportunity for more character building. This time particularly between Kyle and Clea.
Right.
Kyle's questioning why Clea is going through all this trouble, and she tells him, because I'm your friend. It's that simple.
Yeah, and I really like that. Again, we've talked so many times about how this character is not used well in this series most of the time. But we're seeing DeMatteis really use her more and to greater effect. So just the fact that this scene is basically, Kyle Richmond, Clea, the Gargoyle, and Wong, that's to me, that's what made the Defenders so interesting, is that you would have these scenes that have these, there are no marquee names in this scene. And then once Kyle is gone, Clea and Gargoyle were unable to help him. The Gargoyle's upstairs, and he's looking in the mirror, and he's just sort of trying to figure out, he doesn't have anybody to fight right now. And so for the first time since he was trapped in this gargoyle body, Isaac Christians is able to take the time to ruminate and really think about what has happened to him. And he's making some decisions, it says, that will thrust the Defenders deep into mystery next issue.
Exactly. We then transition to Kyle and Luann in the car, in his limo, and we get a flashback to Marvel Team Up 101, which we've talked about here on the show. We don't need to recap the whole thing other than to remind folks that Kyle, his girlfriend in college was named Mindy, and Kyle caused a drunk driving accident, which paralyzed Mindy for life. And she tried to murder him, and Spider-Man got in the way. She tried to murder Spider-Man too. And Kyle, using his money, checked her into a special hospital where she would get the help she needs. And that is where the limo is arriving this morning.
Yeah. And again, this scene is the kind of thing that makes this series at this time, in this era, in the DeMatteis era, this scene makes this series. So Kyle, now in a wheelchair, goes to visit Mindy, who is in a wheelchair because of an accident he caused, basically, or that happened because of him. And she's unaware that, and she's been, painting. She's an artist, but other than that, she doesn't really talk to anybody. She's a little obsessed with Kyle and their past relationship. It's a very love-hate in dramatic fashion, almost, split personality fashion. So he goes to see her, and she turns around and sees him, and she's shocked, and she's even crying a little. And he says, I see you've noticed the big change in me. Life sure is funny, huh? And there are 4 panels where she's trying to react, and she's staring at him and trying to figure out how she's responding to this. And then she starts laughing her ass off and says, "It serves you right, you dirty animal. It serves you right." And then she's starting to threaten his life. "I'll kill you if it's the last thing I do." So there you go. I mean, it's a really fucked up scene.
It's a really fucked up scene. One other notable thing about the scene, and this isn't a spoiler because you're going to find this out in the same issue, but we are introduced to the head of this psychiatric hospital. His name is Dr. Masters. Dr. Masters is absolutely not what he seems. He will become a major villain in the Defenders Rogues Gallery, and he will become Nighthawk's #1 villain.
Right.
Very, very soon here.
Yeah. Well, Nighthawk thinks that there's something strange going on at this place. Now, remember, he's not a Defender anymore.
That's right.
He's just friends with them. But that night when he's able to walk, because as we're reminding people that when the sun goes down, he is once again able to stand. And he puts on his costume and he goes to check out the asylum.
That's right.
Or the hospital, I should say. Because
Clea contacts him via astral projection and tells him, all this time we've thought that the psychic energy that severed Kyle's life bond and left him unable to walk during the day, Doctor Strange and us, the readers, we all assumed that was the 6-fingered hand. It turns out Clea has discovered that it was not the hand. The source comes from the very hospital where Mindy is being kept.
Right.
A pure psychic blast, a pure mind unleashed, Clea says.
There you go. That's right. And that's the key. A pure mind unleashed, puts me in mind of Charles Xavier or Phoenix or other, you've had the mental power of someone directed at Kyle Richmond to sever that bond.
Right.
Anyway, he breaks into the hospital and is immediately confronted under the orders of Masters and another security supervisor or something by a bunch of goons with crazy weapons. They look like some kind of shield weapons from the era.
It's a great panel, and Perlin really kind of channels Jack Kirby, especially the Mad Bomb saga for that panel. It's one of those classic Marvel panels.
Yeah, it's great. It's a bunch of, basically thugs with weapons confronting him in the hallway. We want to have a little talk with you.
Yep.
And clearly Kyle Richmond does not want to have that conversation.
That's right. And Nighthawk begins to fight them, but the middle of the fight is interrupted by a double-page ad for CBS Saturday morning Toontime.
You're so happy you have the actual floppy comic right now?
I am, because there's 9 o'clock, the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show, and teenage Brian, I was kind of, I discovered girls and Dungeons and Dragons, so I really wasn't watching cartoons anymore, but I always made time for Bugs Bunny Roadrunner and, of course, for Thundar the Barbarian. So there we go.
There you go. Well, you also have the Tarzan Lone Ranger, I don't know, wasn't an hour, but I don't know if that was the Tarzan that started with the, I am Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, and this is my domain.
No, I think that came before.
Okay, yeah, because that was a good
I remember seeing that when Shazam and ISIS were still on.
Oh, the live action. People don't know that those shows existed, but boy, they were terrible.
Yeah, they were.
Anyway, Nighthawk makes short work of the goons, and then Dr. Masters shows up. August Masters, at your service.
That's right.
And
he tells them, when we heard about your paralysis, we assumed your work as Nighthawk would be finished. You've obviously found a way to circumvent the problem. And Nighthawk says, we? Just who are we?
There you go.
And Masters reveals his government identification for a group called the Central Information Bureau. Basically, it's like the Marvel Universe equivalent of the CIA. So this isn't even a supervillain. This is apparently Nighthawk's own government.
Right. It's some kind of secret black box operation where they're trying to tap into the mental / psychic powers of the patients that are put into this hospital.
That's right. And like any good James Bond villain, Masters shows Nighthawk, everything. He takes him down to this laboratory where all of the patients in the psychiatric hospital are hooked up to, these computers and these machines, and he tells them that basically what it is a top secret project investigating the potential uses of telepathy for national security.
Yeah.
And, they're going to keep the world free and safe for democracy.
Yeah, which is, in fact, I think, similar to the project that Stranger Things circles around with 11.
Yep.
But in any case, they've tapped into the minds of all these telepaths that also happen to be mental patients, and they're channeling all of those people's telepathic abilities into Mindy, who has turned out to be their prize pupil, and she's become the locus for their experiments.
That's right.
And do you want to give the big reveal, Brian?
Yeah, it turns out a few months back, Mindy had one of her schizo fits. This is Master saying this, not me, okay? I would never call somebody schizo. A real whopper, unfortunately. She was hooked into the psi inducers at the time, and she almost brought the house down. That was, in fact, what crippled Kyle Richmond, a.k.a. Nighthawk.
Because Mindy is so focused on Kyle that when this happened, the blast lashed out and broke his link to his bond to Doctor Strange and the other Defenders. And of course, Masters is just treating this like it's an interesting artifact of the experiment. The fact that and he refers to it as a tough break, which basically makes Nighthawk snap and deck Masters and then rant and start yelling at them all, which rightly so. I'd be pissed. And then he intends to end this all right now. And Masters, for some reason, says, "I was hoping you'd understand our predicament, Richmond. Like, this would be fine with you, Kyle, that we caused this to happen to you. I'm sorry about this, but national security is at stake." And as we know from real life, there are people who think anything is okay in the name of national security.
Absolutely.
So they juice up Mindy and all of the other telepaths, and she unleashes the sort of dark power in her brain in a way that I know you loved, Brian.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating page to look at just from a creative standpoint. You see these blurry shadowed figures launch from her mind, and what they are rats. But these vermin have not crawled up out of some shadowy back alley. No, they have emerged from the stinking sewer of Mindy's mind. Basically, Kyle is being attacked by psychic manifestations of rats, and they're 2 splash pages back to back, just showing him being overwhelmed by these things.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, he's like, his costume's being torn apart. He's bruised and battered. It's pretty cool.
Right. But at the last minute, Mindy remembers that she loves him, and she calls her psychic rats off, and she turns them on all of Master's goons.
Right. She has all of Master's goons basically killed by the psychic rats.
Mindy reminds me of several ex-girlfriends I've had.
Well, can you blame them? So let's see here. I'm going off on a tangent here this morning. But I was thinking, Brian, I know that one of the bands that you grew up listening to had to have been Leonard Skinner. I know you preferred the metal, but
oh no, yeah. I mean, look, I grew up in rural America. You were issued a copy of Leonard Skinner as soon as you hit puberty.
Yeah, there you go. Well, so I was in my mind, I was thinking about the song. I was singing the song "Double Trouble" by Leonard Skinner and thinking that should be the theme for this show. But in any case, all right. So we go back to this. They've been done in, but Masters, of course, is the one still alive. And Kyle says, "Well, Masters, are you satisfied?" And Masters treats it all like, it's just a setback, basically.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's a fantastic villain here. The body language, his glasses are shattered, and he very calmly puts them in the pocket of his lab coat, and he's smiling while he's talking to Kyle. And, we've lost a few key operatives, equipment of inestimable worth, not to mention the damage done to our test subjects. Quite a setback, but, these things happen in my line of work. Yours too, I suppose.
Yeah.
And he just tells him, I'm going to start all over again.
And, yeah, which makes Kyle loses it again, rightly so. Masters lights up a cigarette, almost post-coital after this encounter with Kyle. And Kyle and Mindy are standing there, and Kyle's basically like, look, I'm going to kick your ass. I'm going to ruin you. And Master says, aren't you forgetting a certain upcoming hearing and the matter of a few dozen charges against you? Keep quiet about this, and I guarantee these charges will be dropped. The CIB will clear out of here, and no one will be the wiser. What do you say? And
That's
Kyle's, raves at him and says, no way. He doesn't take the deal. And he's going to squash Masters. And Masters says, we'll see just who gets squashed and who doesn't.
That's right. Meanwhile, we then get this strange interlude. There's these 2 people in Central Park. And one of them, it turns out it's Peter Parker. And these muggers show up and toss Peter into the water. And he turns into Spider-Man real quick and steals some Hostess cupcakes and gives them to the muggers. And the muggers turn themselves in. Very strange interlude.
I'm looking at it going, what is he talking about? And then I flipped back a page and I was like, it's the people who explain, Brian, for people who don't know what you're talking about.
For our millennial listeners, a staple of Bronze Age DC and Marvel comics were the Hostess cupcake ads. They were always 1 page long, and it was always a various Marvel or DC hero who used Hostess cupcakes to save the day. Dr. Doom is tearing up the city, no problem. The Thing hands him a Hostess cupcake, and Dr. Doom subdues. So.
Yeah. Yes, classic. In fact, Marvel and Hostess need to get together and put out a collection of all of those 1-page comic strips. Anyway, so we're back to the Sanctum Sanctorum with Clea and Luann and Kyle. Kyle's very angry, very bitter. Mindy's brain, he says, has been French fried. A lot of innocent people got royally screwed up, some of them fatally, and there wasn't a supervillain in sight, just a smiling protector of freedom.
Yep.
So Kyle says, it's going to be fine, though, because when tonight's globe hits the streets, this thing will explode. That Crumb Masters and all his slimy buddies will get theirs but good. Then somebody has dropped off tomorrow's paper. And
That's
Juan
right.
brings it in from the stoop, Brian. And no surprise to us, what does it say?
Well, the government has covered everything up. New England sanitarium burns to ground. Faulty wiring blamed. It's a dully written piece about a minor electrical fire at a New England sanitarium. A pack of lies. And Kyle loses it. He swears he will have his revenge on Masters.
There you go. Masters is going to pay.
Yep.
Yeah, that was, it's a fun one. It's a really good, solid, standalone Kyle Richmond Nighthawk story. I mean, obviously he's not the only one in it, but it's clearly about him. That's what's happening in these few issues, that DeMatteis is focusing on some of these characters who are not the main characters of the story, which is why the next issue, 103, The Defenders, The Haunting, focuses mostly on Gargoyle.
That's right.
And I would say this is the first time we've had that. This is really sort of the first Gargoyle solo story.
It is. Last episode, you had talked about how you saw something in J.M. DeMatteis' writing that had obviously subconsciously influenced you, and you had used it years later. Defenders 103 is the same for me, and I'll tell you why when we get to it, but I guarantee you anybody who's a fan of my novels and is listening along to this episode, they're gonna see it before anyone else will, but I'll explain it when we get there. This is one of my all-time favorite issues of the Defenders. Excellent. Going back and rereading it, I see why.
So, DeMatteis, and then I think it's really interesting here to note that they finally have separated out the art credits. I think we've given Don Perlin, perhaps, and no offense to Don Perlin, perhaps we've underestimated prior to this how much of this work is done by Joe Sinnott, because now we have Perlin layouts, Sinnott finishes.
Right.
And the difference is that the pencils are done in layout. They're much looser. And that means that the inker is actually doing far more of the finished artwork than is usual in that the splitting up of those jobs.
Exactly.
So credit to Sinnott. We've been emphasizing Perlin, but we should really be giving them shared credit for all of these issues. And this one in particular, the art is fantastic.
Absolutely. And credit to DeMatteis as well, because what we see him doing here as we go through these issues, issue 101, which we covered on last week's episode, it was just a human interest drama, if you had to classify it as a genre. Issue 102, which we just talked about a moment ago, it's spycraft. It's a James Bond, government intrigue type story. Now with issue 103, DeMatteis is playing with the horror genre. So every issue here, not only is he doing these standalone issues to spotlight the individual defenders, but he's doing it with different genres. Yeah. It's just really neat to see.
Yeah, and I will just quickly, this first page it's raining in Christiansboro, and Gargoyle is in a trench coat with a hat and a scarf over his face, so that nobody can see that he's a monstrous creature. And I'm going to actually read, Brian, because I am a child of Rod Serling. The Twilight Zone in reruns was a huge influence on me as a writer. And this is basically, I would say, DeMatteis doing his best Serling. It says, October. Some swear that it is not a month, but an entity, a dark force captured by the gods and held in bondage for 31 days. For 30 of those days, this remains an easily laughed at fantasy. But on the 31st day, this gray morning before All Hallows Eve, laughter comes hard. Fantasy and reality, shadow and substance, the mundane and the miraculous, all seem to walk side by side. And a man never knows what phantoms lurk, eyes gleaming at his back. And you could almost add, in
the
the Twilight
Zone.
Zone, right? I mean, like it's such a classic Serling introduction to the Twilight Zone episode. So I just wanted to point that out because I was rereading it. I was like, Jesus, he's like writing this for Serling. So
yeah, Gargoyle is set upon by some muggers. He doesn't even have to fight them. They get a look at his face and they run away.
Yeah.
And then two more people show up. And interestingly enough, it's not Doctor Strange. It's Clea and Devil Slayer. You know, DeMatteis is really going all out here, making Clea, you know, a force on her own, separate from Doctor Strange.
Right.
You know, a key member of the Defenders.
Yeah, and this is really the first time that, I mean, she's been involved in the Defenders throughout the Six-Fingered Hand.
The Six-Fingered Hand, and
right, exactly. But now she is an independent player in the story, starting last issue.
That's right. So basically, they've come looking for Isaac because, you know, he walked out of the house a week ago, disappeared without warning, and she's been worried about him. And, you know, she brought Devil Slayer along with her to help find him. And she says, you know, he says, why should you care about a gargoyle? She says, I don't. I care about a man, a defender, and more than that, a friend. And we get just a wonderful scene of Clea hugging Gargoyle.
Yeah, because he's so, you know, again, he's a guy who is so sad, he's so depressed, and he just can't imagine that anybody cares for him. And so it's a great scene. It's a great moment. And we need more of that character depth in a lot of these comics. But
yep.
Anyway, we cut back to New Jersey, to a setting we continually return to in this story, which is the ruins of Patsy Walker's house in New Jersey. And she and Valkyrie in civilian clothes are going into the basement ruins, and they find the
spare shadow cloak.
Yes,
remember, she gave Devil Slayer his back.
Right.
So now she finds the spare, and she folds it up into itself. Well, first they rescue the little kid that fell in during the Six-Fingered Hand saga.
Yep.
And then she folds the shadow cloak up into itself and makes it disappear.
Right. So that plot, element is now taken care of. And I will say, this is another tangent, but that moment reminds me so much of the reason why, for all of the things that he contributed to comics then and that still echo down through comics today, it reminds me of the things that used to drive everybody crazy about Chris Claremont as a comic book writer. Because Claremont would have dangling plot threads go on, and I'm not exaggerating, for decades.
Yep.
And here's DeMatteis like, oh, there's this little bit of business that I need to just get out of the way. So he spends this page getting that kid back into the world and making Patsy's shadow cloak go away.
Right. And then we get something we've seen ever since Defenders issue number 1. Whenever the Defenders need to be united against a foe, Doctor Strange appears before them with his telepathic summons. But this time, it's Clea. And she's not calling them to fight a foe. In fact, Hellcat says, what's up? Another nut job out to conquer the universe? And Clea says, no, this crisis is of a more personal nature. Valkyrie and Hellcat answer the summons. Nighthawk, who is appearing before a judge with his lawyer, Rosenblum, does not answer the summons.
Not only that, but it makes him look crazy because the judge and the attorneys can't see Clea's astral projection, and he's basically like yelling at somebody they can't see. And then he says, sometimes I find that letting out a few good yells really stops the itch. So basically, then the judge reveals that, guess what? If you promptly pay $767,000 in back taxes, we'll close your case. All of your troubles with the government will be over.
That seems odd for a plot line that has existed for more than 32 issues in this series.
Yeah. Now,
there's reason, but it seems odd.
Well, and I want to say, here's another nod. Again, like we talk a lot about DeMatteis, and I think this is more about just him being smart as a writer, because the Kyle Richmond versus the government case has, as you said, been going on for dozens of issues. And clearly he wants to wrap it up, but he doesn't just wrap it up. He's figured out a way to turn it into something, much more interesting that he can use for himself.
That's right, because who got Kyle out of this jam? None other than August Masters.
Exactly.
Who appears grinning, and reveals that it was him and his government connections that got all the charges dropped.
Exactly, which Kyle did not. Kyle made no deal for that to happen, but Masters has done it nevertheless, and we'll see more about that. But again, I really appreciate the fact that, not only are we not dealing with that, forever ongoing, boring subplot of the government versus Kyle Richmond, but now it's been turned into something really sinister,
right?
Which I really like. So we get back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, and Clea is sitting around talking to Hellcat, Valkyrie, Devil Slayer, and Gargoyle. They're all trying to counsel Gargoyle, but again, it's Clea doing the talking. She's stepped into the Doctor Strange role now.
That's right. We then get basically a single-page, multi-panel recap of Gargoyle's origin. I don't know that we need to go over that again. Just remember, he was an elderly man who made a deal with the Six-Fingered Hand in order to save his town.
Right. Yep. And then we get, Valkyrie says, there is one cure for the sickness that torments your soul, Isaac, and I will see that cure come to pass. He doesn't know what she's doing. And they basically all are transported by Devil Slayer home to Christiansboro, where Isaac is from. Now, Brian,
I can hear the excitement in your voice already.
As you alluded to, it's coming soon. In fact, in the next issue. But here we have a 3-panel, little vignette showing a character showing up again in disguise, much like Gargoyle, hat and trench coat, at Doctor Strange's door. But Wong answers and says the Doctor is not home. This character wants to come in and wait, and we see in the 3rd panel, it is indeed Hank McCoy, the bouncing blue-furred beast of X-Men fame and Avengers
fame as well.
The bouncing beast. I am so excited, as you know, to get into talking about this character. And then we're going to argue, I have a feeling, about the character who cameos in the next issue. But we shall see. So, let's go to Christiansboro.
Yeah, Devil Slayer brings them all to Christiansboro. And it's very clear to the Defenders that there is a thin line between the folks who should be sleeping there and the dead, because it turns out Christiansboro is deserted. The wind screams, rattling shutters in empty houses, blowing weeks-old newspapers down deserted streets. And Isaac freaks out. He sold his soul to Avarish of the Six-Fingered Hand to save his town. And when the Defenders first met him, Christiansboro was still populated. But now everyone's gone. The town is like a tomb. And there's a strange fog rolling through the streets as well.
Yeah, it's a classic horror moment.
Yep. And then in like any horror movie, the Defenders say, "Okay, guys, let's all split up.
Let's split up and search." I'm full of tangents today, but I just want to say I was telling a story yesterday about, as a kid, I can't draw to save my life. My brother is a very talented artist, and he would take, when we were kids, he took this enormous piece of paper, like the paper that you'd wrap, like butcher paper, basically,
right?
About like 4 feet wide, and he drew Godzilla fighting about 40 different Marvel superheroes. And I tried to send it to Stan Lee, so we never kept it. So man, I wish we'd kept it. But anyway, that's a tangent apropos of nothing. So they split up. Hellcat sees someone shadowing her. She captures him, and it's Simple Joe.
His name is Simple Joe. Keep in mind, folks, this was the 80s.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a perfectly acceptable nickname for this character.
Right. They call him Simple Joe in town. And he recounts what happened in Christiansboro when the haunting began. It started one cool summer night, the howling up at the graveyard and everybody having the same bad dreams. Then the ghosts came drifting down on the night winds, wrecking everything in sight. And I love these ghosts. They have like skeletal faces and they're cloaked. And it wasn't long before folks just started to pack up and leave town, emptying Christiansboro faster than a pickpocket empties your wallet. But I stayed because I didn't have no family, didn't have nowhere to go. You got to help me. And Hellcat is trying to comfort him as a cold, distant laughter mocks her.
That's right. Meanwhile, Gargoyle shows up at his old home, and he thinks he sees his little brother, Jeremiah, run around the house. And Isaac flies after him, and then Jeremiah appears at the very top of this Victorian home, standing on a ledge. And Gargoyle says, after all these years, you still look the same. And his brother says, do you remember this spot, Isaac? I sure do. This is where I died. And we come to learn that, Isaac Christensen, a.k.a. the Gargoyle, he and his little brother were playing soldiers. He pushed his brother, or his brother pushed him. He pushed his brother back, and then, boom, Jeremiah fell off the ledge and died. And Isaac has blamed himself for that ever since. And this little boy who simply cannot be there jumps off again and disappears into the mists.
Yeah, it's a great scene. It's a great scene. We cut away to Valkyrie and Clea. They're walking through the misty streets, the empty streets of Christiansboro, and they find a cat who leaps into Valkyrie's arms. And Valkyrie says the cat seems afraid, and Clea says, yeah, but almost calm, like it's waiting for something. Valkyrie says, waiting for what? And then the cat slashes her face and then runs off.
That's right. An eerie wailing arises, chilling the two women to the bone. The mist on the street rises, and then hands reach out from nowhere and everywhere. And as the mystic maiden and the sword-wielding warrior turn, ready for battle, the wailing dies, and the light dies with it.
So all of a sudden, Christiansboro is pitch black, and these sort of demonic arms are reaching for them. We get back to Isaac Christian's childhood home, where, and again, this is so creepy, dark shadows stuff. I love it. He's in front of this enormous portrait, full-length portrait of his mother. And he's apologizing for never being able to please his father and how much that has scarred him, that he wanted his father to be proud of him and to forgive him for what happened to his little brother Jeremiah. Then his mother walks out of the painting to tell him that she understands. She always understood. And go ahead. Yeah,
and it's then revealed that after World War I, he didn't want to come back to Christiansboro, so he searched the world. He went on a spiritual quest, so to speak, in India and elsewhere, and of course he discovered the occult. He discovered magic. Yeah. He never wanted to come back and take his father's place as the patriarch of Christiansboro, but eventually he did. And as we know, that eventually led to him becoming the Gargoyle.
Yeah. So what he'd learned on his travels, combined with his his place as the unwilling patriarch of Christiansboro, to lead him to where he is now.
Yep.
So then go ahead. I know you're going to want to talk about Devil Slayer in the next scene.
Well, yeah, my boy Devil Slayer, who I love as much as you love the Beast, Devil Slayer finds himself in Christiansboro's cemetery. And, we get a little bit of self-reflection. We find out that Devil Slayer is, in fact, still trying to help Sunshine, the drug-addicted hippie who he encountered back in issue 101. While he's thinking about this, a little girl in her pajamas, a little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl in her pajamas shows up and says, "Mister, what are you doing here?" And he asks her, "Where's your family? Where are the other people from town?" And she starts to cry. And Devil Slayer picks her up and he comforts her. He says, "Please do not cry. I will help you." And the little girl says, "Help me? I sincerely doubt that. You can't even help yourself." And her eyes go red. She's like Regan out of The Exorcist. And then that creeping tide of blackness consumes Devil Slayer as well.
And I just want to say on one other tangent. If you've never read the Stephen King short story, the classic Stephen King short story, One for the Road, which is a sequel to Salem's Lot in short story form, you should. And this moment with Devil Slayer is right out of One for the Road.
That's right. Yeah, and when we turn the page, before we get to it, if you've never read my award-winning best-selling novel, Darkness on the Edge of Town, you should, because speaking of Stephen King enjoyed it. It's his favorite of my novels. He liked it enough that he gave me a cover blurb when I didn't ask for one. He gave it to me years after the book had been published and said, "Here, use this on new editions." But Darkness on the Edge of Town, as an adult, I thought it was an original idea. And it turns out, no, the subconscious brain of teenage Brian completely used what J.M. DeMatteis had done here, because Hellcat, Clea, Devil Slayer, and Valkyrie wake up in the cemetery, and they find out that the cat and Simple Joe and the little girl are all possessed by a darkness. Its name is Null, the living darkness. It's the living embodiment of darkness, which is the same exact monster I used in Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Well, see, it all goes back to the classics.
Yeah. Now, this Null, the origin is a little different. It turns out he was an alien race known as the Seraph. A race of pure-souled, open-hearted beings who dwelled millennia ago upon the surface of Earth's moon. They searched the cosmos for truth. They never found it. And in the grip of a cosmic despair, they returned homeward, their wings taking them one-on-one final flight down into the ocean of fire that then roared across the moon's surface. Basically, they commit racial suicide and give birth to Null, the living darkness.
So the despair of all of these, angelic creatures, angelic alien creatures, combined to create the living darkness.
Yep. So my apologies to Mark DeMatteis. If you want, I can start splitting the royalties of Darkness. But I'm about to turn 51, Chris. This came out in 1982, so I don't know how old I was when I read it. I was a teenager, obviously, but it's amazing to me that stuff like that. I read thousands of comics, and yet this one struck enough of a chord and sat there in my subconscious all those years, and it birthed a novel for me, that I didn't even realize until I went back and reread it for this show.
Yep. Yeah, and interestingly enough, again, I'll say, this is 1982. What we have here in Isaac's home is, to me, the Marston house from Salem's Lot.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Isaac has been visited by the ghost of his dead little brother who he couldn't save, and he blames himself for the death of. His relationship with his father never recovered. So now he's in that childhood home. He's in the form of the gargoyle, and he decides to hang himself. That I should have done this long ago, he says. The world would have been rid of a foolish, half-crazy old man. Mother, Father Jeremiah, I'm coming to you. But only as he steps off his desk and is hanging by his neck does he say, no, this stinking gargoyle's body is too strong. It won't die. So this is how bad it is. He wants to kill himself, and he can't.
Yeah. And that despair, the despair he feels is ramping up. But we now understand the source of that despair. It's right. Null, the living darkness, who feeds off of human despair.
Right. And I mean, this is pretty dark.
Oh yeah, I mean, understand something here, folks. Yes, Jean Grey committed suicide in Chris Claremont's classic X-Men run, but that was handled very differently here. Here we see a superhero legit try to fucking hang himself.
Yep.
And it doesn't work.
Yep.
I mean, if there was anything darker in Marvel at this time, I don't know what it was.
Yeah, it's pretty damn dark. So then the ghost of his father comes in and starts shouting at him, calling him sniveling and spineless, and basically says, get out of here. We don't need you. And the ghost of his mother and little brother chime in. Perhaps the living need you, but we do not. Get out. And finally he crashes out through the window, and he's flying over the town erratically until he encounters Null, the living darkness.
That's right.
And something snaps inside him. And finally, so much time wasted, obsessed with what was, but it's time for what is and what will be.
That's right. And Clea tells him that her sorcerous energies are useless against Null. So Gargoyle flies up to do battle with Null one-on-one. But, he's quickly beaten because, as Null boasts to him, Isaac's blasts seek to leech life essence from Null. And Null is anti-life. He is soulless. He is void. And the living darkness begins to swallow Gargoyle. And then Gargoyle fights back and discovers a new ability. His biomystic bolts always sucked bits of soul from his victims. But he now discovers that the energy flow can be reversed. Gargoyle can pour life out as well as in. And in doing so, he beats Null the Living Darkness.
There you go. And beats his own despair as well.
That's right.
So, Null is defeated. The dead of Christiansbro have returned to the earth. And Devil Slayer says Gargoyle is beyond help. He's dying. He expended too much life force. Hellcat is pleading with him not to die. Gargoyle says, when I sought death, I couldn't find it. And now that I have something to live for, death comes. And then the ghosts of his family appear. My son, you're not going to die, not yet, not for a very long time. We were sent back to help you bury the past, turn your face toward the future. And basically says, we love you, face that destiny with pride. And then that's enough strength, that love is enough strength to let him rise. And Gargoyle just doesn't die. Clea asks if he's all right. He says, all right, and he's smiling. And kudos to Perlin and Sinnott for making this ugly gargoyle face actually look happy. Kind of reminds me of Snegosky's French Bulldog. Why, Miss Clea? I don't think I've ever felt so darn good in all my 78 years. And
that's right.
That's the end of the issue. And yesterday,
but not quite, because there's one thing I want to talk about.
Okay.
And it's not the interlude where Captain Marvel stops a giant flea by feeding it Hostess cupcakes. If you turn to the letters page, historically, this is a very important moment in comic book distribution. You see an ad that tells readers that the Micronauts, issue 38, is going to go to a full 32 pages with no ads, but the only drawback is it will be sold only through subscription or at selected retail outlets, meaning comic book stores. Now, this is 1982. Yes, comic book stores exist, but not across most of America. They are few and far between. The same month that readers are seeing this, they're also learning that Marvel's Kazar and Moon Knight comic books are going to the same thing. This was, in fact, for Marvel, this was their foray into what would become the direct market, which is how we all get our comics today. We get them almost exclusively through comic book stores.
Right.
This is where that started. Now, there were other companies at the time, Pacific Comics comes to mind, who were only available at comic book stores, but they were very small presses. For a huge publisher like Marvel to take this step, it was a sea change for the industry, a sea change that we're still dealing with the effects of today. So I thought that was neat to come across that advertisement at the back.
Yeah, no, very cool. Very cool. I think we should wrap it up now, and we'll start with 104 next episode. We'll try to get through 104 through 106 in the next episode. And I will say, because there's too much going on in the next issue to try to rush through it, including the appearance for the first time as a defender of Hank McCoy, the Beast, but also a cameo by a character who doesn't fit in this story, and who I only like in small doses, Simon Williams, a.k.a. Wonder Man. I like him in this story. He and the Beast were sort of sidekicks for a long time.
They were buddies.
But we will talk more about Simon Williams and Hank McCoy and their friendship, and how Hellcat plays into it. Next episode.
Absolutely. One more time, I want to remind readers, this week's show was brought to you by The Strange Case at Misty Ridge by David Bryan. It is a supernatural cosmic mystery novel partially inspired by the classic works of William Hope Hodgson. It's available right now in paperback and an ebook. The ebook is exclusive on Amazon Kindle and can currently be read for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. Once again, that is The Strange Case at Misty Ridge by David Bryan. As always, a reminder to check out Chris's other podcast, Three Guys with Beards, my other podcast, The Horror Show with Brian Keene, and our engineer Tommy Clark's podcast, The Necrocasticon. All of those are available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, and all other platforms via the Project Entertainment Network.
Brian?
Chris?
Excelsior.
Excelsior, my friend. We'll see you next week, folks.
See you next week with Hank McCoy, the Beast.
Do you love comic books and consider yourself a die-hard fan? Then you need to listen to Parlapod. We have news, reviews, and interviews with your favorite pros, all while bringing some serious laughs. New episodes drop every Wednesday in time for New Comic Book Day. Parlapod is available on the Project Entertainment Network, all major podcast outlets, and parlapod.com. Tune in and fuel your fandom with Parlapod.
My Favorite Story, a podcast author anthology featuring short fiction from the hosts of the Project Entertainment Network shows Three Guys with Beards, Jim Moore, Jonathan Maybar, and Chris Golden,
Tom Clark from Necrocast on
Brian Keene of The Horror Show, Chuck Buda, and Armand Rosamilia of the Mando Method,
Mary San Giovanni of Cosmic Shenanigans,
Jay Wilburn from Matters of Faith,
John Urbansick of Ink Stains,
Biz Zung's Mr. Frank.
Available on Kindle and in paperback and through the Project Entertainment Network store.
www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
This has been an exclusive presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.